My name is Yoki, and I'm on the Vancouver Startup Week team. And before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are grateful to be virtually gathered on Indigenous land, regardless of where you are joining us from. I am grateful to be on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. I am privileged to live, work, and play on these lands. So I want to thank you all for joining us for VSW 2021 and welcome to the Innovation and Culture session hosted by Bench. If you have any questions for our speakers, please post them in the Whova Q&A and you can also upvote questions there. I'll now pass this over to Chris and we'll begin the session.
Thank you, Yoki. Yoki, I'm just noticing I'm not allowed to present my screen.
Okay, 1 second. All panelists.
So while Yoki's setting this,
that?
No, I'm still not able to.
Okay.
Kathy, are you able to?
Yeah, let me jump in here and see if I can.
Great. Why don't I'll get started. Quick agenda. Welcome everyone. If you just go to slide 3. Welcome from the Bench team. We're going to talk about, 2 topics, and then we're going to leave some time for Q&A. The first topic is innovation and culture. And I'm going to talk about what I argue is a very bottoms-up, organic, like in the blood of the company approach to innovation that is generated through culture. And then Kathy is going to talk about DEI, a super important topic to bring out the best in our people and also, do something great in the world. And then we'll leave 20 minutes for Q&A. So Kathy, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to do lots of these.
That sounds great.
There. So quick introduction to myself. My name is Chris. I am the head of sales and operations at Bench. I started my career as a strategy consultant in financial services. I absolutely loved using math, which I was studied at university, to make to put it to use in the world, but I did not like the zero-sum approach to finance. And then I found fintech. And fintech is an opportunity to use technology to create disruptively more efficient and customer-obsessed outcomes, products and services, and just focus on people and helping people and drive down the cost and the simplicity of financial services. While also building great business models. So I knew when I moved to Vancouver from London, I started my career in London. I knew I wanted to find a fintech. I found Bench. I just connected with the mission. And what is Bench doing? Bench is North America's largest bookkeeping service, although we're no longer just a bookkeeping service. We do bookkeeping, we do accounting services, we do tax filing, we do tax advice for over 11,000 clients now, growing quickly. And what we're trying to do is just be disruptively affordable and simple and accessible for the micro business. So think about the 0 to 10 employee business. We're not trying to go up market and get into fancy accounting. What we're trying to do is trying to tell people that want to be solopreneurs or launch businesses at their origination that we're going to be the easiest and lowest cost accounting solution for them. So I'm going to start. So the topic of today is innovation, or I was asked to talk about innovation and what makes Bench innovative. And I was thinking about that. And, the longer I've been at Bench for about 4 years, the more I realized like, this is not about me, or it's not about our CEO, Ian, who had this visionary idea, 8, 9 years ago. But the innovation that I'm increasingly seeing at Bench is just everywhere. It's distributed in our 650 people. And so I wanted to talk about innovation and culture and how like those two are very, very tightly linked. So the story I'm going to start with was just a conversation, just a coffee I was having last week with a team member on our data processing team, Christina. So Christina, again, she's on this team, data processing, who are specializing in, for the banks that we can't get stable automated data feeds for, because bookkeeping is all about pulling in data in super efficient ways and then getting it into like manipulating it into accounting books. For some of these banks, we don't have efficient data sources. And so what we have to do is just scrape data from PDFs and other documents as efficiently as possible. We have a team, data processing, set up to do that. The team is amazing, but it's also about one of 15 different teams that are working together in a really, really tight system to provide this disruptively affordable accounting solution. So it's just one of 15 teams that I'm working with on a regular basis. And Christina's story was, she's been here for about 2 years, loving it. And her experience is, that the team is always in change. The team is always challenging itself. The team is always questioning its processes, questioning its systems. And just generally like really supportive and awesome. And what she told me that it both blew my mind and it didn't, was that in the last year, her personal productivity had doubled. She was producing twice the amount of output than she was a year ago. And by the way, efficiency in our line of business is important because it's, what we're trying to be is disruptively efficient in the providing of accounting services so that we can go out there and provide the lowest, most affordable and accessible rate in the market. So Christina, is on a team that, before I had the coffee with her, it's an awesome team. I knew it was an awesome team. I see the results every week. They're crushing their targets. But this is just one of 15 teams that Benchmates are experiencing this constant evolution, constant change, constant challenge, and just like micro innovation from her teammates. A lot of the innovations that came in the last year, some of them for her team, some of them came from our engineering team. Some of them came from our business operations team, these centralized functions that like build systems and processes and innovations and automations. But a lot of them just came from her teammates, like rolling up their sleeves and trying to figure out a new way to do something. So I loved it. And so Christina and I just started unpicking, like, so what makes this tick? Like, why is this your experience? Why, for Christina's experience, this is the most innovative and positive, experience that she's had in her professional career. But actually it's consistent across Bench. And what drove that? And my point, if you go to the next slide, is that innovation fundamentally is a team sport. Like it's not a big idea from a startup founder. It's not, yes, there are genius ideas from startup founders. There are genius ideas from product leaders that are designing and then building product and startups. But a lot of brilliant ideas don't work. And what makes a company successful over the long run is just an innovative culture, like in its blood, where you just, when you have 100 employees, then 200 employees, or in Bench's case is 650 employees. And those 650 people are showing up, thinking, innovating, and pushing and pushing and pushing. So Kathy, we keep doing this. So culture, my core point is like Christina's experience was that the culture on her team, or the culture on the Bench team, has created this experience that everyone just shows up and innovates. And how do you define culture? Well, I actually, I was interviewing a candidate recently, and she asked me, okay, I read your culture guide. I'm about to start talking about our culture guide, by the way. And she said, that's awesome. I loved it. It really connected with me. But she said, was that organic, or did that like come from a CEO or come from like a person in HR? And my point was, culture is just like, it when like a lot of startups kind of feel like sports teams. Like, it when you're on a team that's clicking and it's working, and when the culture works, and you also deeply know when it's not working. Like your own personal experiences are showing up and not giving you 100%. My experience of the Bench culture is something organically generated over time. I've been at Bench for 4 years. Those were not always easy years. There were ups and downs. There was crushed targets and high fives on the sales floor when we used to be on the sales floor. And there were there was absolutely there were some lows and there were some missed targets. There were some cash scares. Startups are fundamentally hard. But what organically emerged, we then pulled a team of people from across the business about a year and a half ago, once we noticed this like emerging culture that was just clicking. And we said, just like, figure this out. Like, can you just get, like, we had lots of workshops, people put on whiteboards and sticky notes, and we just try to like articulate the culture that had emergently generated, like already organically generated. And it's this organic culture that is driving Christina's experience on her team, but I would argue on all the 15 teams that are serving our clients. And by the way, there's even more teams that are selling Bench and building our technology, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to talk about our 5 principles that I think describe our culture well, or as well as you can with words. So Kathy, the first one is to take a stance and actually just state what you want to be, the type of people that are willing to state what you're going to do, especially when it's uncomfortable. So Bench is taking a stance. We serve 11,000 clients, but we're just a fraction of the way along the journey that we're on. We're here to make a profound difference in the lives of 1 million entrepreneurs by making entrepreneurship substantially more accessible and affordable and easy. We want to be the accounting geeks so that 1 million entrepreneurs in the American market can be experts in whatever they do. Artists, or they want to launch an e-retail store, or they want to be a lawyer, or they want to be a photographer. Great. We'll do the accounting geekery and make it as easy as possible for you. But the point about taking a stand is, it puts you out there to be criticized. When Ian, a few years ago said, we're going to take this to 1 million entrepreneurs, Bench was in trouble. We were having cash problems. Our growth was slowing. Some of the cultural things hadn't quite clicked. So not everything in startups is a straight line and wonderful, but it was easy to criticize. A cynic could say, there's no way the trajectory that you're on is ever consistent with getting to 1 million clients. And then once you make that stand, it's easy to it's easy to be cynical about. And we talk about the company stand, but we talk about personal stands. My personal stand, in addition to just, building a phenomenal life for my family, I started my career in London, not a lovely place to live your life. I moved it to Vancouver because I just wanted to have an immense family experience with my kids when they were young. So that's one of my stands. But the other stand was I wanted to use my kind of math and finance brain to make an impact in the world. And at Bench, we're encouraging people to make these statements. By the way, it automatically reduces cynicism, which I think is one of the most poisonous and challenging. There's a cynical distance that's very easy, and I certainly had to unlearn it from my 10 years in a corporate, big company career in London. Was there's a problem with everything. Everything wasn't going to work. In a startup, you have to be all in. You have to keep your eye on the North Star as those eventual ups and downs and downs and ups and downs happen. So we want people to say that they're going to do something, have it be uncomfortable, but then let that guide them through the ups and the downs. My experience with Christina was she's been on this team for 2 years, and she was absolutely lit up by the ability that, as she doubles her productivity, that drives down the cost of bookkeeping for small businesses. She was also lit up by the fact that as her team was being more and more productive, it was actually taking on more and more aspects of our day-to-day bookkeeping work. And as that happened, our bookkeepers started to have just generally more they focused on what they were good at, which was interacting with clients and advising clients. And so, Christina's experience was she was absolutely lit up by the fact that this is a company on a mission. So the second one was that we keep it human. And that because we're a bunch of humans, people, it's going to get messy. We're in the business of providing accounting services at scale. Most traditional accounting firms are like, they have, I don't know, a few hundred clients and a handful of CPAs, and they're charging, probably 10 times what we're charging per client. So it's small scale, high margin. We're at immense scale and very, very low margin. We're constantly pushing down our prices. We're trying to be as aggressive as possible because we want to bring this service to the world. So to do that, we think there's a lot of systems. We have to think about processes and improvements and iterations and innovations. But fundamentally, one of the statements I frequently use with my team is like, we're just humans helping humans. It's just people helping people. There are people out there that need to understand their, that want to be entrepreneurs, but need to understand their finances and make sure that they're not over or underpaying their taxes. Like, that's where we come in, but we're delivering it through people. And the point about keeping it human is to be deeply understanding and empathetic to the, I talked about the company's ups and downs. Well, what about personal ups and downs? And that fundamentally, the way that we all show up to do our jobs and make an impact is to support and help other people be better. Like, fundamentally, my job is I have 6 direct reports. My job is to make those 6 direct reports better at their job every day. Their job is to make their direct reports better at their job every day. And it's just this idea that there's just, lots of humans that all have ideas and all have roadblocks and impediments and need coaching and need support and need to be recognized when things are going well and supported when things are being challenging. And we just put that at the center of our culture. By the way, this is what we were doing already. We just decided that we'd write it down. The third one is to be responsible. And also to stop being told what to do next. This one, when I spoke to Christina, I said, Christina, like, how is Bench so different than your previous experiences? And she said, well, fundamentally, we're all just kind of trusted. We trust each other. By the way, trust is a really interesting concept, because trust has, it has tones of like this kind of like moral and ethical thing, which, by the way, matters. Like, you should be hiring good people for your team, people that are good people, but also competence. Like, can they do the job well? Do they have the skill? Everyone here in the world has an amazing skill set somewhere in their career. But if you are, fundamentally, if you don't like working with numbers, you're probably not going to end up being a bookkeeper. You might, maybe you just love connecting with people and be an incredible person on our sales team. So there's a performance element, and startups, demands, if you're going to go on a big mission, you need incredible people in a high performing culture. But fundamentally, like, we do that. We get incredible people, we train incredible people, we coach incredible people, and then we trust the hell out of them. And, Christina's experience was like, I can just get on with my job. And guess what? In the last year, she's doubled her output. Now, what also is happening is other people are trusting other people. There are people on Christina's team that will say, this month, I'm actually going to do less client-facing work because I'm going to work on these automations. And people trust them. They're like, awesome, you do that. We'll make it work for you. But, there's just a like deep, almost like an assumption. It's not even almost. There's an assumption of trust. One of the statements I frequently use with my team is like, if you don't trust the people you're working with, either they or you should not be on that team. And by the way, I think we have an amazing team at Bench. That rarely happens. But, if I was to imaginarily be on another, back in my corporate career, I would kind of grind through these experiences, even though I didn't really trust the other person on the other side of the table. And now I know, like, I just shouldn't be on that team. So once you trust people take responsibility. And, at Bench, we've done a lot of work to articulate, it doesn't matter where you're, you could be a sales rep, you could be a client success rep, you could be a bookkeeper, you could be a client-facing CPA. You could be someone on our research team, someone on a data processing team. By the way, there's like a lot of teams involved in, disruptively affordable accounting services, but all of those people have razor sharp clarity on what they are accountable to deliver. Then they're trusted to be responsible and not micromanaged. They can go off and do it in their own way. And what that creates in Christina's team and in other teams is people are creating these micro innovations, right? They're just like, oh, wow, I'm doing this thing. There is a better way to do this thing. And then there's this like hive mind on ways. You have multiple people responsible, for different, they're all working on the same team. They all have the same clear outcomes. You just get this hive mind of innovations. Kathy? The fourth one is default open, sharing all of the uncomfortable data. So back before Bench's culture really emerged, what we experienced was, when I think about default open sharing of data, we'll talk about things like financials. Anyone at Bench can log into our financial plan that shows the next, 3 to 4 years of cash flows, or our trajectory, our planned trajectory for the next few years of cash flows and the financial results into a pretty wild amount of detail, like pretty granular. You could find out some pretty interesting things. And we just put it out there. It's data, like why not? We have our monthly FP&A meeting where our finance team presents the last month's results and says, hey, this is where we did well. And this is where we really didn't do well. That's a publicly available Zoom for anyone to attend. And we get about 10 to 15% of the company chooses to log into that. So there's like financial data. But for me, there's also like qualitative data, feedback for people who, direct feedback. Hey, we're working together on this project and this isn't working. Or like, hey, I was planning for X amount of lead gen and the leads didn't show up. By the way, that's what the sales team would say to the marketers. Over the last few months, the marketing team's been saying, hey, I've been giving you all these leads and you haven't been converting them at the high enough rate. And it's just really encouraging really direct flow of information. Now, what prevents that? In my experience from my corporate career, and even in the first few years of Bench until we organically got good at this, the opposite of open data for me is ego. People who are solving for themselves over for the company and its mission. If you had a bad result as a sales leader, it'd be pretty easy to obfuscate and like throw dust in the air and a bunch of reasons and maybe like massage metrics or the metrics that you report on. But that doesn't help anything. And that solves for yourself. I'm a sales leader, by the way, amongst many, that was actually my first role at Bench was, really working on the sales team. So I'll talk about sales. That would work for me. It would make me look good. Oh, like Chris hasn't made any mistakes here, but it wouldn't make me any better at my job. And so we had to learn, and I had to unlearn this from my corporate career, to be incredibly low ego. It doesn't matter. Like, let's not solve for myself. Let's solve for the mission. And if we're all being successful against the mission, we'll figure it out. So it's just opening up. Okay, these are the sales results. Okay, you open that up. It's pretty painful, but now our marketing leaders and our operations leaders can all start to contribute to what can we do better here? And if you want people to innovate, like fundamentally, the data is it getting more efficient? Is it getting better? Are client outcomes being better? All of that data needs to absolutely free flow. And what we organically figured out is the more open the data, the faster the innovation, the more ideas that get generated. Last one, get scrappy. We used to have a principle before Get Scrappy that was something about like experiment together, and it was very kind of fluffy. It felt awesome. It was just like, yeah, we experiment. But Bench had ups and downs. And what I noticed in some of the harder times was it actually started with our sales leader, Ada. Ada is just an incredible leader and a motivator, and she just inspires confidence and she inspires people to do things. If you take Ada a problem, she'll challenge, if a rep comes to her with a problem, she'll say awesome and challenge them to find a solution. She's very challenging. But the word she kept using that just caught on like wildfire was scrappy. Like, hey, we don't have a lot of resources. We don't, startup, we're taking on Intuit, I think they're worth 100 billion valuation. Their engineering team is 200 times our engineering team. And that's our competitor. It's like, okay, we have to we can't just do one thing a little bit better than them. We have to outflank them in about 1 million different directions. And that means every single person on this team has to just get scrappy and just try it. And here's the thing about experimentation. Experimentation sounds great. Awesome. Yeah, let's experiment. That sounds fun. Well, guess what? Most experiments fail. And what we're trying to remind people is, when you get scrappy, just try it. And as leaders, Ada, myself, and my other direct reports, we're trying to de-risk the fear of failure. We can celebrate it. We can celebrate, every time someone comes to me and oh, this didn't work. I'm like, great. What did we learn? And we just talk about what we learned. And we're like, great. So when this is a learning that we're going to have for the rest of time at Bench. Now, what are we going to do next? And it's really kind of just scrappy, just try it. Let's not, in big corporates, you sit around, you analyze things because people are fundamentally afraid of taking a risk that might go wrong, might somehow be attached to their reputation. And again, but get scrappy is just, this idea of just, okay, it's good enough. Let's go. In Christina's team, there was literally, she named 3 or 4 other of her colleagues. This is on a team of 20, who are just constantly spitting out these new micro innovations and these new automations, most of which don't work. So, going to wrap up. I know I'm slightly over time. Innovation, it might start from a startup CEO. It might start from a big idea. Every now and then, there's going to be some big product innovations, and certainly Bench does those as well. But a vast majority of innovation that happens in any team has to show from 100% of your team showing up and giving 100%. That comes from culture. That comes, showing up with 110% of their brains and their creativity and their drive and their passion. That comes from culture. And culture is really, really hard to pin down. But I think this is a pretty damn good attempt at codifying the Bench culture. And I'm going to wrap up there, but I'm going to pass it over to Kathy, who, on the topic of getting 100% of people to show up with 100%, has been driving our DEI at Bench, and I think just in an immense way. So thank you. Kathy, you're on mute.
I'm going to stop sharing for a second here. I'm going to see if I can get it out of full screen. Thanks, Chris. Because we also want to make sure that and Yoki, if you're still there, do we have time to at the end where folks are actually able to ask some questions if they?
Yeah.
Okay,
so
fantastic.
I can share the questions later as well.
Okay,
I have
amazing.
them on my screen.
You do. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, feel free to ask questions to Yoki as we go along. So I'm going to move into diversity, equity, and inclusion at Bench. How is that related? So essentially, what we're asking here is what's possible when you have an actually truly innovative culture. And between the pandemic and Black Lives Matter alone, this last year has been really an absolute pressure tester for a lot of companies and our culture and our cultures. I joined Bench late last summer as part of our company's response to the murder of George Floyd, which actually today marks the first year memorial of his death. So we can take a moment to just, yeah, it's a huge moment to recognize, wow, 1 year ago was that tipping point for a lot of us of saying, that's enough. We're not going to participate in this trajectory and we're going to do something different. And what I will say is that the culture is really why we were not only able to commit to anti-racism and anti-oppression as strongly as we did, it was not only able to sustain our commitments, but it was really actually why we were able to continue quarter on quarter to really double down on our engagement and actually reshape who and why we are for the long haul. Something I've heard a lot of companies talk about over and over again is profitability and innovation as the reason or the business case for pursuing diversity, equity, and inclusion, or anti-racism as a company. And for a lot of us, just making a buck or even innovation or like a flashy new thing isn't good enough. And that certainly also describes Bench. So rather than innovation being a business case for DEI, we've taken a stand for anti-racism and anti-oppression as a non-negotiable baseline. And what we found is that an innovative culture is actually then what enables and empowers a company and its people to stand for something and for reasons we can also stand behind. Okay, so what was the stance that we were able to make? I'll start with our mission, which Chris actually briefly mentioned earlier, which is to make a profound difference in the quality of life of 1 million people, and more particularly entrepreneurs, small business owners. And really wanting to do that in a not kind of like generic way, but actually ensuring that that profound difference is a good one for people. And that 1 million people actually includes everyone. So trying to go this not colorblind or all lives matter sort of a way, but rather in actually recognizing the pervasiveness of discriminatory financial exclusion in this industry that we are players in. And so the DEI mission for my team then was to really ensure that the commitments that we made were in line with our commitment to anti-racism and anti-discrimination as a company. And that it was actually shaping who we were and therefore the impact that we did have and that we do have in the future. And because of all of that, we were able to make this really bold stance with respect to our response to that tipping point following George Floyd's murder. And it was this. Our stance was that we recognize systems of racism and discrimination absolutely exist. We also recognize that we have been complicit in these systems and that we need to actively work against them. That we are engaged in this ongoing work. So it's not a moment in time of identifying and dismantling systems of racism and discrimination throughout our workplace and building more just and inclusive ones. We also recognize this absolutely would not be perfect. The chance that we would make mistakes was 100%. So stating that super clearly, we are going to make mistakes, and in the face of that, action is non-negotiable. And that we are committed to investing in change, doing the work of learning and unlearning, apologizing when we do fail, and trying again. And this wasn't simply a stance that we took in, say, for example, the recruitment team or the people team even. This was a stance that was company-wide. And that has a lot of implications, just recognizing that a lot of the conversations around diversity and inclusion, this phrase of diversity and inclusion, were largely relegated to recruitment and a kind of like an optical representation. And what we wanted to make sure was that what we said actually meant something across the entire company, that our commitment was a stance that we took as a company from our CEO as well as our leadership, but also across all of the different business units, recognizing that that kind of a statement has implications for the way in which we do what we do in every part of the business. And so how in this kind of environment is DEI enabled? Is our commitment to anti-racism enabled? So I'll kind of go back through our principles here through this kind of a lens. So taking a stand, doing what's right, and that really was this baseline of systems of racism and discrimination do exist. This is a really straightforward, almost maybe blasé statement to some people, but it's actually an incredibly threatening statement to others. So for us, this is our baseline, this is our why. And it is our culture of taking a stand on things that matter to us, that enabled us then to start here rather than somewhere else, like a business case for profitability. Default open, being really open to being held accountable. That shows up in our statements that we are recognizing we're complicit in these systems. This is a statement that's on our website. We're saying this is who we have been, this is who we continue to be, and that we're working against. And so we are doing this work of saying, there's a problem and we need to fix that. There's a problem and we need to fix that. And as we're doing that, hey, we made a mistake and we're sorry. When you have a culture that is low ego, that is blameless, that isn't sort of like always trying to find out who to point a finger at to say this is your fault, we're failing forward as part of the deal. And where there's a premium put on vulnerability and transparency, you can actually commit to change in environments where making mistakes is actually guaranteed. And mistakes are guaranteed when you commit to the work of anti-racism and anti-oppression. In this work, we often say, if you're not failing, you're not doing the work. So owning our failures has also meant being about focusing on our learnings and then being able to actually share them more widely, recognizing that a lot of companies are asking the same questions we are. And I'm trying a lot of different things, and we want to add our voice to the conversation and say, hey, we tried this, it didn't work. This is what we learned. And we tried this other thing and it did work. And by doing so, we may be able to help each other, help another person out, help another company out along the way. And this also encompasses that line of the capacity to apologize as a company, the ability to say, we messed up and we are sorry. I think this is a terribly rare skill set out there, and one that is actually really crucial to our default openness as a company. Be responsible, own your outcomes. So this is around that statement. We're engaged in the ongoing work of identifying and dismantling systems of racism and discrimination throughout our workplace and building more just and inclusive ones. We are about the work. In DEI work, it's really, really important to ensure that we make a very clear distinction between our good and best intentions and our good impact and outcomes. That means that we own the impact we have on our teams, on our company, in our industry, and in the world. And ultimately, it means DEI is integrated and baked into everything that we do. And I'll talk a bit more about this later in terms of how it pertains to systems change. But really, this is about owning that kind of integrity piece. This is more than just a bunch of people saying we don't want to be racist, but it's really about then saying, okay, what does that mean? And how can I measure that? And how can I ensure that I'm being held accountable to that desire? Get scrappy. So action over fear. Action is absolutely non-negotiable, even in the face of mistakes and even in the face of failure. So in our environment, we absolutely recognize you don't have to be an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion today as a leader in order to lead your teams in that way. Anti-oppression is a long journey. It's a lifelong journey. But what we are committed to at Bench is developing ourselves into leaders that are invested in equitable change in our own right. So in how we interact with our teams and how we make business decisions, we are all drivers of DEI at Bench. This isn't kind of like a programmatic isolated committee or a holiday a year or that sort of a thing. It's really about that kind of innovative, scrappy, iterative attempt and experimentation across the entire company. Because that's really the only way that change happens, is a lot of people trying a lot of different things in the same direction. And so at the end of the day, it really is about doing something over nothing. And again, not just out of good intentions, but for good impact. And then keep it human. This is really the whole package delivered by and for real people. That means that people are not expected to contort themselves to fit some mold of normativity. We absolutely encourage our people and our clients to show up as their whole selves, and we take responsibility for ensuring that that is possible. We do not ignore differences. We recognize and value them. It means we take ownership for ourselves and our actions. And it means that we are all open to learning from one another, no matter where we sit in the company. So what does that actually look like? This is a really not pretty drawing, but it'll get the point across. This really is an ecosystem. The only way that this can work, and the only way that innovation can continue to iterate across the entire company on this matter of a more equitable future for our staff and for our clients, is for it to actually live in kind of an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is training and education for all of our employees, as well as our leadership additionally. It's also this flip side, which is all of the training and education that does happen at our company is then also looked at and sifted through and assessed through a DEI lens to ensure that there is an equitable approach to the curriculum itself, as well as how it's delivered. Systems change, that is then affected by our training and education. So we're hoping that as we become more educated and we change what we know, we are also applying that to what we do. So systems change really is, how do we do what we do? That means, how do we determine compensation? What is our brand identity, and how do we communicate that? How do we proactively recruit, and how do we design our products, and who do we design them for? What are our performance assessment frameworks and procedures, and how do promotions get determined at Bench? Where and how do we spend our money? How do we develop budgets? How do we make decisions at that level? How do we interview candidates? Who is our client base, and who is not our client base, and how do we care for those people? So you can start to see, gosh, this is really, it literally is everything that we do, and trying to apply a new mindset to everything that we do. And everything that we do is done by people, and we want to make sure that those people actually genuinely feel as though they can show up as their full selves, or as much as themselves that they would like to bring to Bench. And so we want to ensure that we are actually taking responsibility for the environment that we do cultivate at Bench. And that's all these things around belonging. And then public engagement, that really is that accountability circle. The more we put out there, the more we're getting feedback, the more we're giving back, the more that people are able to kind of add and innovate even on what we've done. And we've definitely started that conversation last year, and it's been a really vibrant one and a very fruitful and rewarding conversation that we want to just keep building on and keep kind of growing. What does it look like for a company like ours and other companies to make anti-racism and anti-oppression commitments, and then have it really flood through all the things that we do to have an impact in the world? Just a couple examples of how this shows up. So one of the things, I'll say just a couple examples just because of the time, but one of the places this has shown up the most is in our new banking product. We are building a bank, and we're adding that to our product services. Banking is an incredibly historically and present racist institution, overtly as well as inadvertently. And so it means that it's embedded in the way in which credit is distributed, who gets banking, who doesn't get banking, who gets lending and who doesn't get lending. And that has severe implications for how we're able to deliver on a service like this. And so our entire leadership team that is building this product, as well as some of the builders themselves, we are taking part in a 5-module series on learning about the history of inequitable banking practices and policies, and about new innovations on how to actually offset some of those discriminations that exist. And that is both training and education, but also going into the systems change space, really in order to have that larger, wider impact on a product that we really care about and that we're innovating on all the time. And so this really is like one great example of how innovation and equitable practices and anti-racism can all come together to develop a really, really impactful product that will do hopefully really, really well and draw in people that actually would not have otherwise had access to a product like this and a service like this. And so we're super excited about innovations like this and continuing to go in that direction. For time's sake, Yoki, I'm happy for us to go to questions.
All right. Just 1 second. Let me pull this up. So we do one question we have, I guess this is for Chris. How has Bench encouraged kind of an environment of trust that you were talking where employees feel free to experiment with new ways of working? Because I guess that's like we do want to encourage more employees doing things that way.
So the question is how, sorry, you're okay, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go for it. Yeah, go ahead.
So, but just to clarify, the question is like, how do you create that culture of trust? Presumably, if you're not in a culture of trust, how do you get there?
Exactly.
I'd love to say there was like a magic formula. I can talk about like the Bench journey.
Yep.
And then it was kind of long and arduous, and then we were there, and it was obvious in hindsight. By the way, there's like a great book that I keep intending to read, but I'm terrible at reading books because I just have no time. But The Speed of Trust, everyone recommends. So every now and then I Google its frameworks, and I've read about 1/3 of the book. But it's on this topic of like, how do you create this culture of trust? The experience that I had at Bench, the word I keep coming back to is, so for trust, I think there's two sides. I think there's like this integrity and intent. By the way, I'm saying, I actually think this, I'm just stealing this from The Speed of Trust right now, but it's a good formulation of like what I experience as well. Most good books you read after you've made the learning and it just connects the dots. But there's this idea of integrity and intent. Like, do I trust this person? And does this person has the intent of the team in mind, or are they solving for themselves? And the other one is this idea of competence. Like one thing I saw in a lot of corporate environments is there was this like Peter principle that people get promoted until the point that they're kind of struggling. And then it's like, whenever you're interacting with someone, you never know, like, how did they get in that role, and do they actually have competence? And I would say in the latter, like, performance cultures matter in startups. Like, we all just need to deeply trust. Like, I have a sales team, and that sales team is converting leads that marketing's produced. I need to just know that marketing is awesome, and I can just move on and think about sales. Like, and if you ever have those doubts of your other teams, that's poisonous. And startups are hard. Like, you'll never get there. So performance culture is a given and necessary. Like, you need to be really good at hiring, really kind of make sure that you're hiring exceptional people that are great at their jobs, coaching, assessments, promotions, like all of that. And unfortunately, as a leader, performance management, like making sure that you have the right people on the team. Most startups know that. The other one on the integrity and intent, this is the word that I keep coming back to, is low ego. Something I observed, I actually worked for 2 consulting careers and consulting firms early in my career. One had this like culture of like pushing the credit onto others and like falling on your sword and taking all the blame when things go wrong. And the other one had the absolute opposite. So I saw these like 2 very contrasting scenarios of what I started to call ego. And I just noticed in the lower ego culture of like, if you keep solving for the people around you, the team does well. And if the team does well, your career will also be pretty awesome. So here's the thing is like, what I learned is you can be very, very low ego and still be very, very successful in your career. Those are entirely consistent. Whereas, people who are solving for themselves in the short run, that ego of like, and by the way, sometimes it's like Machiavellian, and like a lot of people think about ego as Machiavellian, but frequently it's actually, ego might display itself as like defensiveness, like something goes wrong, oh, it wasn't my fault, or like it's obfuscating like what absolutely happened. Oh no, it wasn't sales, don't worry, it was something else, that was the problem. Or when you miss a sales target, like everyone's pointing at other people. So how do you get a team of low ego? That's challenging. I think that I think selecting a team matters here. Like, you know, I was at one firm that was very low ego and another that wasn't. And, you know, had I been smarter and today, I would have actually assessed those two opportunities, those employment opportunities, looking for that data point. Because I don't think, you know, I think as one employee, it is challenging to change it amongst many. But the other one is, you know, for anyone who's listening as a leader, is hiring, but also just like demonstrating. A lot of your behavior as a leader gets mirrored in ways that you almost you almost don't, like, it's easy to overstate, but it's also easy to understate the ability, you know, if you're working with others. By the way, I say as a leader, actually as anyone, your behavior gets mirrored and people notice low ego. And people will be around people with low ego and reciprocate it with low ego. I say frequently, there are Machiavellian people who take advantage, and then that person or you should not be on that team. But seriously, like it just needs to be demonstrated. And you know, my experience at Bench was there were some toxic people that our CEO had to make hard decisions about. But then that was only like one or two. The rest of it was just people demonstrating it, and it had a snowball effect, and everyone kind of noticed what was working, and everyone kind of mirrored it and replicated it. And then it became part of the culture. And then the people that didn't fit in that culture left, and then the people who were attracted to it came. So it just very, very slowly over time, I think, snowballed.
Okay, thanks, Chris. We might have time, maybe 5 minutes for one more question, I guess, for Kathy. If you can share kind of an example where Bench has learned from one of your own experiences with DEI and how that has changed.
Yeah, I'll speak from my own personal experience. Just recognizing that a lot of the questions that I tend to get in this environment is, how did you get people to get on board? And I think that's a crucial question because the only way I think, or I should say, the way in which impact can really become exponential out of a company, say, for example, like Bench, is if everyone has some sense of responsibility and ownership. So that's why I really, I think that those key aspects of a culture, it doesn't have to be those 5 in that exact way, but there are very specific things about Bench's culture that have enabled the environment of high impact and high change. And one of those is this kind of like blameless, be responsible kind of an aspect to it. And when you say, hey, this is all of our responsibility, and you have a culture that understands what it means to take ownership of something, then there's a difference in how people kind of interact with that. And so one of the things that we did fairly early on was we started to actually meet as an entire senior leadership. And what this meant was that in this environment, we were all able to start experimenting and practicing in a no judgment, high accountability environment of, hey, let's just give this a try. Let's all try to actually integrate DEI into what we do and how we do it. Let's do it together. So I don't feel alone. I don't feel like I'm the only one, but also in an environment where it's essentially developing a practice of, it's not the DEI team's responsibility. They're here, they're going to do all the DEI things, and we're just going to go do our own thing over here. But actually kind of imagining that relationship. I'm here to support you. You are the subject matter expert in product design. So I'm going to work with you on what it looks like to integrate DEI into product design, because I'm not a product designer, turns out. And so actually walking hand in hand with leaders as they're looking at their very specific environments and actually looking to make change in that environment in that way. That has been one of the most fruitful learnings at Bench, at least for me, is when we all give it a try, then there's way more energy around it. There's also way more buy-in, and there's also way less fear and anxiety, which all of those things kind of together, coupled with this culture of, yeah, I'm responsible too. And I can get scrappy and I can make a mistake and I can apologize for it. All of those things, we're sort of interacting in this environment of, hey, we're all senior leaders here and we're all going to take some piece of this and own it. But we're going to do it together. We're going to do it shoulder to shoulder. We have Kathy's support and her team's support, and we're all going to take those baby steps in the same direction together. And yeah, I would say that has been one of the greatest learnings, certainly for me, but I think all of us have kind of found that space to be an incredibly a learning environment for all of us.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on both of this. Well, we are kind of approaching the 10 o'clock mark. So I do want to thank both of you for coming here and talking to us today, and for the attendees for joining the session.